We've learned to call certain acts senseless. It's a comforting word. It suggests randomness. It suggests the person simply broke. And if they broke, then the rest of us are safe, because we haven't broken yet. But here's the uncomfortable truth. These acts are not senseless. They follow a structure. They repeat a script. They climb a staircase we've seen before. And the reason we keep calling them senseless is not because they lack logic. It's because recognizing the logic forces us to admit something we'd rather not. That the pattern is cultural, not just clinical. Sometimes a current event is not an event. It's a pattern breaking the surface again. Over the next weeks, Tender Reason will occasionally follow those surfaces, not to report, but to interpret. This channel is multidisciplinary by design. Psychology, philosophy, science, and religion are not competing explanations. They're layered depths. And with what happened at Brown University, we're going to do something rare online. Step back from the name of the incident and look at the structure that keeps repeating. What happened at Brown University on December 13th is not a case to be solved. It's a pattern to be understood. From this point forward, we step back from the specific incident to examine the architecture that keeps repeating. The dominant story offers a checklist: mental illness, access to weapons, social rejection. Pick two or all three, mix them, add tragedy, repeat. And yes, those factors matter, but they don't explain. Because millions of people are depressed. Millions have been bullied. Millions live near firearms, and they don't do this. So the question isn't, why did this person have access? The question is, why did this script become available to them as a solution? A quick warning, not a trigger warning, a moral one. We won't turn this into entertainment. No gruesome details. No armchair diagnosis. No cheap certainty. We're here for pattern, process, and the psychology of repetition. Let's start with something universal. The need to be seen. Not admired, not celebrated, just seen. To exist in the eyes of others. To matter in some measurable way. This isn't vanity, it's ontological. Recognition is not a luxury. It's how we know we exist. When you're ignored, really ignored, something ontological happens. You begin to wonder, am I real? And that's a kind of terror most people never experience. Now imagine you are young. You are in an institution designed to sort people, school, university, workplace. And in that sorting, you land at the bottom, not the bottom of grades, the bottom of social legibility. You are not hated. You are not feared. You are ignored. This is what the literature calls significance loss. It's the psychological equivalent of vanishing. And the terror of it is that there's no clear enemy. No one did this to you. Everyone did. The system did. Reality did. And here's where the distortion enters. Because if you can't restore significance through socially acceptable means, achievement, friendship, respect, you begin searching for alternatives. And one alternative is always available: infamy. Infamy is recognition inverted. It's the photographic negative of honor, but it's still visibility. It's still mattering. It's still forcing the world to know your name. This is not about the perpetrator wanting to be famous. It's about the geometry of visibility. When you're invisible, any form of being seen, even infamy, becomes a kind of solution. And the media is the amplifier. It doesn't cause the act, but it guarantees the reward. 24-hour coverage, manifestos read aloud, faces on every screen. The person who was no one becomes the only story. This is not about glorification. This is about validation. The validation that says, you were real, you had impact, you will not be forgotten. And there's a reason campuses appear so often in these stories. They're not just locations. They're symbols: status, identity, belonging, and failure. Which means an attack there is never only physical, it's also social theater. Now let's complicate this, because not all of these acts come from the same relational position. Some perpetrators are insiders, students attacking their own schools, employees targeting their workplaces. They belong formally. but they feel excluded emotionally. The attack is an attempt to reverse a social hierarchy that rejected them from within. Others are outsiders, individuals with no formal connection to the target. They've never set foot in that building. They don't know the people there, but they've constructed a symbolic bond. The place represents something, a group, a worldview, a system that failed them. What matters here is not the biography. What matters is the nature of the bond, real or imagined. Now, whether you're an insider or outsider, the psychological architecture is strikingly similar. Both types share the same mechanisms: exclusion, alienation, a sense of being denied something owed, and both use the same cognitive architecture to justify the act. Moral disengagement. Moral disengagement is how ordinary people do extraordinary harm. It's a set of mental maneuvers that turn off guilt. You reframe violence as justice. You sanitize harm with neutral language. You dehumanize targets. Suddenly, they're not people. They're obstacles. And here's the key. This doesn't require pathology. It requires permission, permission from a narrative, permission from a group, permission from a narrative that says violence is how you matter. Permission from a culture that models violence in film, in news, in history, as the language of power restored. The insider and the outsider are climbing the same staircase. They're just starting from different floors. Now we need to talk about repetition, because these events don't scatter randomly across time. They cluster. After a high-profile incident, there's a window, on average roughly 13 days, where the statistical probability of another event spikes. This is empirical. It's measurable. It's not coincidence. The term for this is contagion, but that word gets misunderstood. Contagion doesn't mean imitation. It doesn't mean someone watches the news and decides to copy. Contagion means the threshold shifts. Think of it like this. Imagine you're standing on the edge of a cliff. You've been there before. You've thought about jumping, but you didn't, because no one else had, because it seemed unthinkable. Then one day someone jumps and survives, and the story spreads. And suddenly the cliff isn't unthinkable anymore. It's precedented. This is what the research calls cultural scripts. Violence becomes available as a response, not because it was taught, but because it was modeled. And each repetition strengthens the script, makes it more legible, more real. Freud called this the compulsion to repeat, the unconscious drive to replay painful patterns, not to heal them, but to master them. On the social level, repetition isn't pathology. It's a kind of cultural memory. The act gets passed down, not genetically, semiotically. And here's the tension we have to hold. Talking about this can amplify it. Silence can enable it. There's no clean solution, but talking carefully is not the same as silence. Being precise is not the same as avoidance. So we continue with the obligation to speak truthfully. What do we lose when we stop asking who they were and start saying what they were? One of the most dangerous comforts is calling the person a monster. Monsters don't teach us anything, but humans do. And that's precisely what makes the pattern terrifying. Because here's what the data shows. This is not a snap. This is not a break. It's a trajectory. Most of these acts are planned, weeks, sometimes months. And during that time, the person climbs a psychological staircase, step by step, maneuver by maneuver, justification by justification. At the individual level, there's the slow dissolution of moral boundaries. The first step might be a violent fantasy, just a thought. The second step, writing it down, sharing it with someone. The third, acquiring a means, researching, rehearsing. Each step lowers the inhibition for the next. This is what psychologists call gradual moral disengagement. You don't become cruel all at once. You practice. At the relational level, there's what researchers call leakage. In many cases, intentions are communicated before the act, to friends, online, in writing, in signals. But the signals were fragmented. One teacher knew about the writing, a peer knew about the threat, a parent knew about the isolation. But institutional systems, loosely coupled, as sociologists call it, failed to connect these fragments into a coherent picture. This is what sociologists call structural secrecy. Not conspiracy, not cover-up, just organizational incoherence. The information exists, the pattern is visible, but no one is looking at the whole picture. And at the cultural level, there's the script itself. The idea, transmitted through film, news, history, that violence is how you prove you matter, that masculinity is dominance, that humiliation demands retaliation, that infamy is immortality. None of these layers alone causes the act, but together they form the conditions, necessary but not sufficient. A five-part convergence: marginalization, vulnerability, cultural script, institutional blindness, access to means. And here's the hardest part. Most people with those 5 factors still don't act, which means we can't predict, we can't profile, we can't prevent every case, but we can recognize the staircase. And recognition, even without certainty, is the only leverage we have. So let's return to where we started. The word senseless. These acts are not senseless. They are legible. They follow a logic we've built, a script we've transmitted, a staircase we've left unguarded. And the reason we keep calling them senseless is because the alternative is harder. Admitting that the violence isn't random. Admitting that the culture of performance, the myth of meritocracy, the machinery of recognition and exclusion, all of it creates the conditions, not the cause. The conditions. This doesn't mean every excluded person is dangerous. It means exclusion hurts, and unprocessed pain, in certain contexts, with certain vulnerabilities, under certain cultural scripts, can become rage, not inevitably, but predictably. And if we can name the structure, we might not stop every tragedy, but we can stop pretending we don't recognize the staircase and start watching the steps that lead to it. If you've lost someone to violence, or you feel the weight of these patterns, resources are listed below. This channel is built to think together, not to leave you alone with complexity. Books and sources mentioned are listed in the description. This video is part of the playlist, The Psychology of Being Human. New videos every Thursday and Sunday. Thank you for staying. This wasn't easy, but unexamined patterns never are.